Hmm. You arrived at Direct Station, where the headlines meet what is hidden, what is beyond the veil, what is in the sky above, what is within us. I am Kate Gary. Hi there, and thank you so much for tuning in. I am coming to you today from a world that seems to be accelerating in multiple directions at once. The sequence of things here tends to be tolerating and making better sense of a few key headlines, as I define key. So it might explain or contextualize those headlines from the realms beyond. Some of what might contextualize those headlines from the land of prose and poetry. And finally, some of what might strengthen or embolden us or stabilize us as we walk through this wackadoo period of time. We're all aware of the wisdom that passed down across generations that says it is always darkest before dawn. I'm guessing you know from your own experience that this does tend to be true. And in many ways, that sort of universal knowledge captures this strange moment we're living through. Here in the United States, we're witnessing an alarming dismantling of scientific institutions and environmental protections, among many, many others. And this dismantling has been a process that leaves many of us wondering what will be left standing when this passage finally shifts. And yet, when we look beyond our borders, we are starting to see something surprising and wonderful. We're seeing early signs of resistance, of concentrated, big enough pushback against authoritarian approaches to governance. Today, I want to explore this tension between breakdown and resistance through both the headlines and the hidden patterns available to us. Because while things might look bleak on the surface, the energetic weather suggests that we're at a pivotal turning point, one where destruction might actually be setting the stage for profound transformation if we ready ourselves. And I want to talk about how to do that. So whether you're policy-minded or news-avoidant, astro-curious or skeptical of all beyond the veil, I invite you to sit with me for a bit as we make sense of things in this wild moment where we're traversing together, regardless of our origins. Let's unpack it, knowing that the goal here is to witness, understand, find context, find hope, and find action. So when we visit the horrible things, we're doing so to better gauge the moment and better plan for what happens afterwards. And to know that there's an afterwards. First, let's take a painful but importantly mentally present inventory on some of the damage that the Trump administration has wrought in its first 100 days. Let's be more aware for a moment of what's happening, of what's being undone in this nihilistic sweep of all things sacred to the status quo or things precious to the liberal mindset, or honestly, all structures intended to project humanity and dignity into the lives of Americans, particularly those who require, I don't know, rural hospitals or safe but affordable products or garbage-free streets or some kind of safety net when they're in a rough patch, or free early education, or. I was going to say for people who live below the poverty line, but what I really mean is people who aren't super rich and able to opt out of public systems or public offerings. So this administration and its fans have relished demolition. In some ways, that remind me of that unloved little boy or almost teenage boy who lived next door in the Toy Story movies. Do you remember him? The one who ripped heads off dolls or blew up action figures with explosives far too powerful for a boy to possess because he didn't believe it mattered or that toys deserved to retain bodily integrity, or maybe because it made him feel more powerful. So like that little neglected kid, we see these actors giggle and pull the trigger as they enjoy the destruction of all systems, programs, and institutions in the American government. I think there's more to it than this neglected child acting out, but first let's notice some of the debris that they're leaving on the ground. You've got the FCC, who governs online privacy, among other things, or the SEC, who regulates the integrity of the markets, or the FTC, who regulates fairness and business practices, or truth in consumer advertising. All these things we take for granted, right? The Consumer Federal Protection Bureau, who enforces laws like the one that disallows medical debt from being included on credit reports, or the Consumer Product Safety Commission, who regulates toasters, which is why they stopped setting kitchens on fire somewhere in the mid-1970s, or how the National Highway Safety Administration, who requires seatbelts and other safety features, which resulted in an unbelievable reduction in traffic deaths. I tell my kids all the time how much car accident-related death there was when I was little, or how many fires there were, right? So they've taken a gleeful hatchet to all these things that keep us safe. Now, you and I could probably easily name wildly imperfect or even unfair, even harmful things that each of these agencies has caused or practiced, but there is such a huge difference between fixing and destroying, she said, stating the most obvious thing ever. More than regulations or protections we enjoy but don't always notice, we're also seeing the National Institutes of Health, our country's premier biomedical research agency, being pulled up by the roots. So here we have an institution that is a huge part of, if such a thing exists, America's greatness. And one of the institutions that has made us the world's leader in scientific research, medical research. It's why the world's best scientists, most of them, many of them, come here to study and practice. It's why the cutting edge research, or most of it, that changes the world often comes out of the US. Since January, over 1,300 scientists have been fired from this one institution, and more than $2 billion in research grants have been canceled. So scientists with decades of experience being shown the door, critical research projects halted mid-experiment, potential medical breakthroughs that simply won't happen. A whole generation of young scientists suddenly noticing that their careers or their research or their intellectual pursuits are vanishing in thin air so long as they stay in these borders. An exodus of great minds has begun. Meanwhile, the Environmental Protection Agency has announced plans to reconsider 31 different environmental rules, primarily those focused on climate change and pollution from fossil fuels. The guy running it, who used to be the guy defending Trump at one of his impeachment trials, said in his announcement that we were living through, quote, the greatest day of deregulation our nation has seen. A frightening sentiment when you consider, the air, the water, the soil, our bodies. They did some small version of this in the UK over the last decade, and there is now untreated human waste floating in the Thames. Like the Thames is to London as the Hudson River is to New York City, or Mississippi is to the center of the country. Rather important waterways. Food safety hasn't been spared either. The FDA's implementation of something called traceability rules, designed to prevent or at least track and understand foodborne illnesses and outbreaks, is now stalled indefinitely. These rules would have helped quickly identify contaminated food sources during outbreaks, something that would seem like a universal good, regardless of political affiliation. And there's something about chickens and turkeys and salmonella limits being withdrawn. So food poisoning is more likely than it was 100 days ago. And yet here we are. This pattern of dismantling extends beyond science and regulation into nearly every aspect of civil society, from education to housing to airplane safety to even public broadcasting. The thread connecting all of these actions appears to be an ideological commitment to removing government guardrails and enterprises regardless of the consequences. All right, so it sucks quite a lot. And so we continue to endure this dismantling of everything we benefit from but don't think about much. And we're kind of waiting and watching while we wonder if the Jenga tower will suddenly crash as a result of all the blocks they've removed and removed and removed. While we're watching institutions crumble here in the US, though, something remarkable is happening globally in response to our suffering. In just the past 10 days, at least 2 significant elections have shown a dramatic shift away from right-wing populism and towards progressive collaborative governance models. You see, incumbents have been tossed out of leadership in almost every free election to have occurred in the last 4 years since the pandemic and all that inflation, right? The recessions and just politics, the cultural divides have led to a general distaste for who's in charge, and the choice has been a hard turn towards the right. So for the first time, though, you're seeing that change. In Canada, Mark Carney's Liberal Party secured victory on April 28th after a wild reversal of momentum and collective wisdom in his country. Just months ago, the Conservative candidate, who I swear to God had adopted Canada First as his slogan, mimicking our president, and he enjoyed a commanding lead. He had leaned into culture war stuff, a massive reduction in taxes and social programs, and until January, he was praising the American president as a successful businessman before he tried to distance himself from Trump. But Trump and his administration, as part of the path of destruction, has included the American relationship with Canada. Trump's back and forth tariff dance has heartily included Canada, as has his surprising and catastrophic reinvigoration of America as an imperialist force in the world, through which he repeats the joke/threat of Canada becoming America's 51st state. No one thinks it's funny. But more than all that direct antagonism to Canada as a country, the administration has turned the longest unguarded border in the world to one rife with tension, incarcerated travelers, an open hostility towards groups and individuals brave enough to continue to try to cross. And beyond that, friends, Canadians consume our media, our discourse, and through millions of transnational families and relationships, our experiences. Witnessing our dive into destructive chaos, Canadians chose their Liberal candidate. This sweet nerd who hadn't had a chance in hell when he rose to the leadership of his party prior to Trump's inauguration. So a surging Canadian nationalism and a decisive rejection of Trump-adjacent politics has occurred. In fact, the Conservative running even lost his own parliamentary seat in the process, a seat the man held for 20 years. And then last week, the Liberal Prime Minister in Australia made history by becoming the first Prime Minister in 21 years to win consecutive terms. His center-left Labour Party secured a convincing victory over a Conservative coalition and a character who also stokes culture wars, also demonizes refugees, and refers to public television as hate media. Sound familiar? So like in Canada, this represented a dramatic reversal from just months earlier when the populace was leading in the polls. And like in Canada, Trump's tariffs and hostile approach to allies played a decisive role. When Trump imposed a 10% tariff on Australian goods in early April, the Prime Minister, who would shockingly win a second term, called a press conference and said simply, "This is not the act of a friend." The moment crystallized for many Australians the choice they faced: a prime minister who would stand up for national interest, or an opposition leader who had tried to emulate and would likely try to connect to Trump's. The tactics that seemed unstoppable a few months ago, and that still feel overwhelming here, soul-killing even, stoking fear, targeting journalists, targeting civil society, a profound xenophobia for anyone not white or housed or patriarchal or straight, et cetera, et cetera. So this movement of hateful discord promising simple solutions to complex problems by encouraging followers to punch down through votes appears to be losing its effectiveness. Just yesterday, we saw a more complicated and entrenched response in Romania, a country which borders Russia and Ukraine and is therefore way more assimilated into a loud and effective propaganda campaign. One that was strong and effective enough to literally buy illegally an election in Romania in December. So because that election had been canceled by their Supreme Court after classified intelligence was revealed, a new series of elections was scheduled. Yesterday was the first round, and election polls are slower to come in, but early signs show their populist, anti-democratic leader in the lead. The man immediately grabbed a resolute-looking desk and a microphone and declared victory before all the votes were in. But what is significant about the numbers right now, and I think it's a real sign of hope, is that behind him are two different pro-democracy candidates with substantial showings. To get into those weeds for just a minute, the populace had 40% of the vote with two pro-democracy candidates behind him with 20% each. There will be another round there in a few weeks. Do you see what's possible even there? You'll notice, by the way, that I am not talking very often about the left versus the right. The reason for that is we can no longer use these terms. We can no longer use these concepts, right? So we have to talk about who is pro-democracy and who is populist, meaning autocratic. The pattern of resistance to authoritarian figures is spreading. with these pro-democratic forces mobilizing across borders. Romania might yet join this global shift towards collaboration rather than division. This movement isn't just happening in the traditional liberal strongholds. It's emerging wherever people recognize that our collective challenges require collective solutions. Exactly the kind of transformation we desperately need to see, but also, if you'll allow a look at the context, which deeply supports this rise in successful resistance to oppression, disillusion, dichotomized hate of the other, of anyone who's not like me. But here's where I want to bring in another layer of understanding about this simultaneous rising of hope and triumph for the collective and the demolition on the very ground which so many of us are standing. From an astrological perspective, what we're witnessing politically aligns perfectly with our old friend Pluto's movements through the skyland of Aquarius. So Pluto is depth, is intensity, is transformation. Pluto's the underworld, not hell, but hardship and self-discovery. Pluto is the things we go through that make us more real, more alive, more in touch with grief and the human experience. Pluto is that deep internal knowing, that earned power that we feel when we deeply understand suffering because we have known it. It is guttural. It is the parts of yourself that are primordial. The parts of you that know, that trust your own infinite ability. The part of you that is deeply intimate with pain. The extent to which we have integrated that pain is the extent to which we are in alignment with Pluto. And you'll notice as people get older, the longer they live, the more they have made peace with their pain, right? Have made peace with their shame. And that's part of what this alignment can be about. But whether or not we have done that so-called shadow work, so we often call it, when we deal with our shit, when we deal with our shame. Whether or not we've done that, we are moved and affected deeply by the things Pluto does. One of the wild things about Pluto is that he moves really, really, really slowly. Remember, he's this little tiny thing way out there. It takes Pluto 248 years to orbit the sun, which means he's in a particular skyline for anywhere from 11 to 32 years. He kind of wobbles around. And when planets change skylands, the relocation gets us, affects us, makes us, individually and collectively, more aware of, more involved in the new part of the sky that it's in. And when it changes, or it's in the early degrees of that new land, we feel it because it causes changes, like big changes, like all caps changes. So such a change, such an ingress or a movement into a new skyland began in earnest in November of last year, November 19th. So as we learned of the vote, as we adjusted to what would be in America, we immediately had a change of mood. And, my friends, a change in what became possible. So this transit into the skyland of Aquarius will continue to 2043 and 2044. So quickly do the math for what that means for you personally. I mean, I'm 53, so I'll be 74 or 75 when this chapter wraps up and the globe shifts again. We are in a seriously new era that we will be in for some time. You're like, oh yeah, no shit, we're in a new era. Okay, oh, new era of what exactly? Okay. So Pluto's the planet of profound transformation and evolution, but his process always begins with destruction. Pluto exposes what's rotten or unsustainable, brings shadow elements to the surface, and forces a reckoning with power, with who holds it, with how it's used, with whether it serves what's good in the world, with whether it serves the realm, if you will. Right now, Pluto is in the early degrees of Aquarius, a sign that governs collective systems, humanitarian concerns, innovation, revolutionary change. This combination then of Pluto, Mr. Evolution, wandering into the skyland of collective humanitarian innovation, creates an energetic environment where our social structures and our institutions must undergo deep transformation. But Pluto doesn't build before it breaks down. Like when have you evolved without spending a little bit of time on the mat? A little bit of time on your knees, a little bit of time mucking around in the parts of you that you're afraid of or ashamed of. We are in the breaking down phase, and it is brutal to witness or experience. What makes this moment particularly potent, though, is that Pluto, Mr. Intense, Mr. Transformation, just stationed retrograde on May 4th. May the 4th be with you indeed. When a planet stations, it appears to stop in the sky before changing directions. And this is when its energy is most concentrated and powerful. For weeks leading up to a station, the planet's themes intensify. With Pluto, that means issues around power, control, destruction, and transformation become totally unavoidable. To understand what this might mean for our future, we need to look at the deeper patterns Pluto reveals. Pluto's process is not random destruction, it is purposeful, taking apart. Systems need to break down so their flaws become undeniable, creating the necessary conditions for rebuilding something even better. The last time Pluto was in Aquarius was from 1778 to 1798, a period that saw the American Revolution, French Revolution, Haitian Revolution, Industrial Revolution, and profound challenges to monarchical power across the planet, our planet. The destruction of old systems created space for new, more democratic forms of governance, though not without immense struggle and plenty of setbacks. I'm going to add another layer of complexity here, but I really believe that you can handle this, and I think it's really cool and important. So Pluto has a 248-year cycle, and next year is America's 250th anniversary. That means that while Pluto returns to the part of the sky that causes revolutions, and we start to see resistance to oppression begin to rise again, a resistance to tyranny, right? On a global scale, America is experiencing its Pluto return. In other words, Pluto has returned, or did recently, and is therefore close enough, and will be for years, to what is called the Pluto return. So when you have a return in your life, when planets come back around to the places that they were when you were born, it tends to significantly affect you. For Saturn, Mr. Sirius, that happens at age 27, age 58, and age 85. Any big life changes at those ages? Or Uranus return, which we only get if we live long enough to see 84, but 84 tends to bring some spasm of rebellion or of certain moves of big changes if an elder is still in charge of their lives. Or Chiron happens, Chiron's return happens around 50. Chiron's the wounded healer. It's a big asteroid that affects us all. And like, how many 50-year-olds do you know who did not deal with their wounds, so now their wounds are dealing with them? So planetary returns have a big impact on us. So because people don't have Pluto returns, we don't live long enough, we don't live 248 years, we know less about Pluto returns than we do other closer, faster planets, but we know a bit about the Pluto return of nations. They tend to be significant, culminating moments where a building change suddenly becomes real. So a few quick examples that I sorted out are going to make you more willing to believe astrology is whether that matters. You've got the fall of the Roman Empire during its third Pluto return. You've got the rise of Queen Elizabeth I during Britain's second Pluto return. You also have the deaths of Napoleon and Stalin during Pluto's returns in France and Russia. As you can imagine, all of these moments led to new opportunities, new growth, and massive transformation, not only for the countries, but across the world. When we have a Pluto experience in our lives, when we have a Pluto transit in our lives, and any significant hard time where you had to go down in order to come up, when that happens in our lives, it is sort of a process that is designed to kind of take us to our root, take us to our center, and undo us, so that we might stare our shadow, we might stare the harm we've caused in this world, or the shame we have, or the regret we have, or the pain we have locked in little boxes somewhere inside of us, right? So when you have a return, whatever is kind of being held has to get dealt with. So in a Pluto return for a nation, the original sin or the original harm is reckoned with. The United States' original sin is the oppression and removal of people who weren't white coming in from Europe. So you have the destruction of indigenous tribes. You have the oppression of enslaved Africans arriving, and you have the dislocation and maltreatment and deportation of Mexicans who were here before the white people were, and the border moved, and they were suddenly not in their own land, right? These are the sins. These are the early sins, the early harm of the American entity within which now each of us stands. And there's been some discourse in the last decade, 2, 3, 4, 5, about how to contend with that, right? There's been very strong opinions on both sides of like, well, should we just forget it and put it away and pretend whiteness is the norm, white Europeanness is the norm, or should we deal with it? Should we assign blame? Should we create new power over structures, right? Should there be new domination and new shame held by a different population of people, right? So there's lots of like sort of finger pointing and blame that has gone on in all directions. But what we know, what we can say affirmatively, is that we as a nation have not, as individuals and as a collective, dealt with our original sin. We have not integrated that shame. We have not integrated that tension, that conflict. We have not made meaning of, made peace with the things that divide us, the ancestral memories that are so separate and apart and so in conflict with each other, right? We have not reckoned, we have not done that work. America has not done its shadow work, y'all. And so now we enter this Pluto return. It started in 22, but I mean, we're heading back in that direction now with this retrograde. Right? So like, we're going to be in, Pluto moves so slow, we're going to be in it for quite a while. That reckoning, that coming back around, and have you dealt with it yet, you know, can destroy, as it did in Rome, an empire, or can allow a nation to rebuild itself. So now we are in this period of systemic breakdown and renewal. Our institutions, our scientific, our regulatory, educational systems are being stripped to their foundations. This is painful. This is frightening, especially for those living it in their direct personal lives. Like my career just dramatically shifted because of this, right? But it's also forcing a collective reckoning with what these institutions, what this entity, this nation is truly for, and how these institutions, how these programs, how these offerings might better serve the collective, might better serve all. What if, through all this somehow necessary pain, we are coming on a new beginning, a transformed and evolved entity inside which all of us get to live? Can you imagine such a thing? Raising new generations of Americans with a new idea, or a renewed idea, or a more universally owned idea of what America could be, something completely different than what it has meant. Something completely renewed from how it has sort of been dismantled, been undone. It can be rebuilt with a new purpose that holds all. I can even take this a step further. Have you heard some of the talk about generational curses? Meaning, if you're a descendant of a line where abuse or poverty or substance or harm or suffering has been one of the key arteries that you've inherited, but you, or maybe your parents, or even maybe your grandparents, or hell, maybe your children, as you watch them grow, are shaking off that legacy. Like those videos that are going around lately where the moms start old sayings like, I brought you into this world. And the kid goes, and I will love you. Or stop crying or I'll give you. And the kid says something like, a hug. Like, these are beautiful, profound examples of families who have undergone, who have underdone, who have examples of families who have undone generations of harm or unhealthy patterns of default coping mechanisms that didn't lead to more actualized children turning into more actualized adults. But so many of us have taken that legacy we received and turned it into something better for our children. Like, this stops with me. I'm going to do enough of my work so that my kids don't experience what I experienced. I saw a guy on Instagram the other day who was saying, a comedian, who was saying how his son told him he's not cool. He's like, I'm so cool, you don't even know. And you'll never be as cool as me because you didn't have an alcoholic, abusive mother. So you'll never be quite as funny as I am, right? This is a profound and increasingly more common act of love to protect our children from what we have endured. Maybe what's happening right now is the breaking up generations of imperfect government, systemic racism, default patriarchy, profound and wildly increasing disparities between what workers and corporate titans make. We have numbers far worse than the Gilded Age. More simply or concretely, what we talked about up front, from take the NIH, for example, who, by the way, today there was an announcement that they canceled a program meant to help new parents understand what causes death while sleeping. Like, let's remove that program. Let's remove that knowledge, that information, and a process through which it can be distributed, right? So, so the NIH then, or the government, is dismantling the NIH, causing immense harm, leaving room for immense harm to occur without support. It is also exposing how vulnerable our scientific establishment is in the first place to political interference. This realization could eventually lead to stronger protections for scientific independence and more robust funding mechanisms that can't be so easily dismantled. Similarly, the rolling back of environmental regulations is bringing into sharper focus, or will, as the consequences of such regulations being withdrawn, the actual consequences of pollution on communities, all communities, not just communities that aren't like mine, that I can ignore. As these impacts become more visible, they may catalyze stronger popular demand for environmental protection, something that would transcend partisan divides because it's rooted in lived experience and just sort of an accepted, understood thing that everybody should have a right to. The recent global elections suggest that this process might already be beginning. As destructive approaches show their true colors, whether through tariffs or hurt allies or cuts to essential services, voters appear increasingly willing to reject them in favor of more constructive alternatives. America has long been the wealthiest nation in the world, and we take worse care of ourselves than other prosperous countries everywhere. At the risk of losing you by repeating one of the best Aaron Sorkin speeches of all time, slightly amended data, I should say. I'm going to quote Jeff Daniels as Will McAvoy in NBC's Newsroom, which I have to tell you holds up remarkably well in many regards. It is also problematic in many regards. But in it, Will, this newscaster character, is asked by a young person, why America is the greatest country in the world. And he responds by saying, America is not the greatest country in the world. You're going to sit there and tell me that America is so star-spangled awesome that we're the only ones in the world who have freedom? Canada has freedom. Japan has freedom. The UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Australia, Belgium has freedom. 195 sovereign states in the world, and like 89 of them have freedom. In case you accidentally wander into a voting booth one day, there's some things you should know, and one of them is that there is no evidence to support the statement that we're the greatest country in the world. These are new numbers now. We're 36th in literacy. We're 28th in math, 16th in science, 49th in life expectancy, 33rd in infant mortality, 4th in median household income. Right? So maybe as Pluto goes retrograde, meaning starts to intensify things that it affects, maybe the Pluto effect in Aquarius returns to the spot it was in 1776. Having seriously significant implications for what we might become next. And maybe this president and the movement he caused only helped us reveal us and our weaknesses and our fault lines and our unresolved shames and our neglected corners And to use a big word, many, many, many inequities. Maybe it's the early stage of a painful but ultimately beautiful transformation. Even William Butler Yeats speaks of the armed rebellion that ultimately led to the original Bloody Sunday in Ireland. Yeats' poem, Easter 1916, refers to this idea of a, quote, terrible beauty being born through war. Pluto will be in Aquarius until 2043. So we're only at the beginning of this transformation. The breakdown phase may continue for some time, but the retrograde period we're entering now invites deeper reflection on how that power is being used and alternatives might be possible. When the election was coming, and we knew, anyone watching the sky knew that Pluto was about to move into Aquarius, this skyland of the collective, of revolution, of change, of humanity, right? So a lot of people looked at that and other aspects of what would be present on election day and thought, maybe we can preserve our democracy easily. But what we forgot in that hope and in that assumption is what one must go through before one gets to have that evolution, right? So when Pluto comes all the way back around, we would be invited to have that deeper reflection on power, right? And so we are. But there are serious signs that there are limits to this destruction. There are places on the planet, at least, that are already waking from that toxic dream and choosing a way out of that hardship that veers away from oppression and othering and moves inexorably towards a collective prosperity. So where does that leave us as individuals trying to navigate this tumultuous moment? How do we maintain our sanity and sense of agency while watching institutions that we value and in many cases depend on being dismantled? The why is this little bee in my bonnet, right? So it's about more than this kid in the backyard blowing up dolls. I've been thinking a lot while we have a president insulting dolls. I've been thinking a lot about nihilism, about movement to dismantle or destroy, about the sense of despair that can only be undone by violence or proverbial chainsaws. And I've been thinking too of Heather McGhee's work on the notion of a zero-sum game that tends to drive American decision-making, and that if I see myself as better, more moral, more productive, more responsible, more ethical than you, then I'm going to want to remove the supports for you, for those I have placed in a group lower than myself, in order to punish or diminish that group. McGee talks about how American policies of austerity that became popular, like the undoing of the social safety net or consumer protections now, one of the examples she uses in the book is from late 60s, early 70s. Remember the episode of Mr. Rogers, where he's sitting with his postman, who is a Black man, and he makes this symbolic gesture to the country tuning in, like with the kids watching. They both put their feet into a pool. And to us seeing that now, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But in the moment, because in the South, the response to Jim Crow ending, the response to the civil rights movement was to not integrate the pools, but to fill the pools, right? Like if I can't have it without you, I don't want it. If I have to watch my child swim with a Black child, I am not going to have my child. I prefer to have my child not swim, right? So in The Sum of Us, she says, Heather McGhee says, Black writers before me, from James Baldwin to Toni Morrison, have made the point that racism is a poison first consumed by its concoctors. What's clearer now in our time of growing inequality is that the economic benefit of the racial bargain is shrinking for all but the richest. The logic that launched the zero-sum paradigm, I will profit at your expense, is no longer sparing millions of white Americans from the degradation of American economic life as people of color have always known it. The thinking that what's good for one group has to come at the expense of another is what has gotten us into this mess. Our fates are linked, and injury to one is an injury to all. right? So this idea of depriving my neighbor in order to be better than my neighbor hasn't gotten us anywhere. Americans haven't realized this. And as Pluto begins its retrograde, our reckoning with that game has simply come into focus. But listen, one of Pluto's root promises is that if you settle down and get emotionally present with the hard truth, with the suffering, your own or your countrymen, you will be a part of the thing that comes out of this more whole, more clear, more in love with life than your neighbor that you were before it began. The gifted and powerful British Somali poet Warsan Shire describes this power of emotional presence and witness. She says, later that night, I held an atlas in my lap, ran fingers across the whole world, and whispered, where does it hurt? When we take a global perspective on resistance and collective healing, we are able to make it through with our integrity and our hope intact. Remember that periods of institutional breakdown have historically preceded periods of rebuilding. The current destruction is not the end of the story. It is the stage for what comes next. And what comes next will be shaped by those who remain engaged and committed to building something better. Focus on preserving knowledge and expertise outside of institutional structure. You work in science, or education, or environmental protection, or any field under attack, speak. I know sometimes it feels like you're pissing into the ocean, but you're not. Have you guys discovered Blue Sky? It's like Twitter in 2011. It's like enriching and a place where sharing information and ideas feels rich. Maybe it'll change, or maybe I'll have a yucky experience soon. But so far, it's been actually a really nice place to be. Go there, go somewhere, and tell your stories of schools, of animals, of plants, of medicines, of treatments, of preventions, of protections, of laws. We who have been the experts in our fields, the nerds who disappeared down some gully that others relied on but worried not about. Tell your stories, tell your knowledge, share what's being destroyed so that we have a record of which parts of this should be rebuilt and how. And what mistakes cannot be repeated, right? What priorities should now be considered based on the learning of your lifetime, your career, as short or long as it might have been. That opportunity will finally arrive. Tell us about your area of valuable information or expertise that is being diminished. This might mean downloading data before it disappears, or recording conversations with experts in your intellectual community, or simply keeping track of the changes you observe. This documentation will be invaluable during the rebuilding phase. Do not assume that this pendulum has swung right off the clock. We are in a cycle, and we are in the brutal part of it. But speak your wisdom, your unique knowledge, your unique perspective into the collective so that we all might benefit from where you've been. Knowledge that's distributed is harder to destroy than knowledge that's centralized. Oh, and rewatch, or maybe watch for the first time, or how dare I say, read Fahrenheit 451. God, it's so good. It holds up. It is so relevant and applicable. I pulled a few quotes. Here's one. We are all bits and pieces of history and literature and international law. Byron, Tom Paine, Machiavelli, or Christ. It's here. Or here's another one. Stuff your eyes with wonder. Live as if you dropped dead in 10 seconds. See the world. It's more fantastic than any dream made or paid for in factories. Or finally, about a character whose life is devoted to protecting ideas, dying inside her burning house. And our narrator says, there must be something in books, something we can't imagine, to make a woman stay in a burning house. There must be something there. You don't stay for nothing. So yeah, we live in a time when we almost decry our inability to read for long periods of time without the interruption of a screen. But the ideas, the exchange of ideas and its new mediums is part of that interruption. So offer your wisdom to the world in whatever form is possible for you. We need you. We need what you know. We need your imagination. Imagine a world where what you know is illegal. Write it down and others might know. Start a subset. I did. This sounds melodramatic, maybe, but you are an agent of this time. You, I want to remind you, are here at this time with these people on this planet, with other planets doing what they're doing. And we need you now to do your thing. What is it? While Pluto's transformative process can be brutal, it also creates opportunities for profound renewal. Throughout history, periods of great upheaval caused by Pluto's transits have often preceded periods of renaissance, of rebirth. We're living through the upheaval phase now, but the seeds of renewal are already visible if we know where to look around the planet. Keep the faith. Feed yourself with ideas from times of undoing behind us. Contribute to the Renaissance now. As we wrap up today, I want to offer 3 things to carry with you. First, a practice that ensures your wellness through this testing time. Forgive me if you've heard this and think it's trite, but gratitude. Notice what's good. Notice what's happening around you, what's beautiful. Notice even what's new and beautiful. As a result of these painful changes, like these elections around the world came at the cost of America's suffering, right? Make a list each day. It can take 3 minutes. If you can't come up with anything, try running water. Try the leaves are getting bigger outside my window. Try the friend you reconnected with yesterday, or try your child's joyful moment. Try your time alone in the car. I promise you have a list every day. And if you turn it into a practice, it changes how you see the day. It'll change how you experience the hard things too. And it will, I promise you, you will experience the weight and the reach and the number of the good things differently. It is strange, and it is so, so, so true. Second, I want to offer you a reflection, and if you'll allow, a writing prompt or a prompt for a conversation with someone who makes you feel safe. What are the Pluto stories in your life? How did the times that felt like they might destroy you end up saving you? How did the times when you were suffering lead to more freedom than you had previously known? How have the times when you allowed yourselves to be truly emotionally present in your own pain make you stronger, make you more whole, make you more ready to be of use and support to other people in theirs? If you peek at this in your own life, it may bring you closer to being able to be present for and tolerate, from a meta perspective, the hardship all around you, all around the planet, now in service of what we might become. And third, some inspiration from Allen Ginsberg, a bit of his poem, Plutonian Ode. Ginsberg wrote it in 1978 while protesting the Rocky Flats nuclear weapons facility in Colorado, and it perfectly captures the transformative potential within the threat of destruction. What might we find in ourselves if we stare into the shadow that Pluto beckons, and then dare to speak? Here's Ginsberg. This ode to you, O poets and orators to come, you, Father Whitman, as I join your side, you, Congress and American people, you, present mediators, spiritual friends, teachers, you, O master of the diamond arts. Take this wheel of syllables in hand, these vowels and these consonants to breath's end. Take this inhalation of black poison into your heart. Breathe out this blessing from your breast on our creation. Forest cities, oceans, deserts, rocky flats, and mountains in the 10 directions pacified with exhalation. Enrich this Plutonian ode to explode its empty thunder through earthen thought worlds. Magnetize this howl with heartless compassion. Destroy this mountain of plutonium with ordinary mind and body, speech. Thus empower this mind guard spirit gone out, gone beyond me. Wake space. So, he invites us all to speak, y'all. Speak into the madness, speak into the pain, speak into the poison. As we navigate these turbulent waters together, I invite you to hold both the reality of what's being lost and the possibility of what might emerge. The dismantling of our scientific institutions and regulatory frameworks is real, and it is devastating, as is the undoing of so many careers and plans and projects and stable lives. So many intellectual babies, so many passion plays. Almost none of us have escaped from this destructive rampage. Almost none of us know no one it has harmed. But equally real is the emerging global resistance to governance by division and disruption. The cosmic weather, the energetic weather, especially Pluto's transformative journey through Aquarius, and now the enhancing prospect of a 6-month retrograde, suggests we're at the beginning of a much longer process of breakdown and renewal. But what is happening now is not the end of the story. It is the difficult middle of the story. A story that is still unfolding. A story in which you are a main character and has so much left to offer on the other side. If you want to explore your story, you're part of this story. And you as the main character, I want to sit with you. I want to look at where the planets were when you were born. I want to look at what that says about what your strengths are. I want to look at the ways that it validates your experience, that it validates your urges and your weaknesses and your desires. I want to look at the way it validates what you're ashamed of and helps you bring it into the light, out of the shadow, helps you stare. I want to help you stare at that shadow, understand it, welcome it, integrate it into who you are and what you're becoming. I want to look at the map that the chart provides to help you imagine what you might be as you lean into the gifts that you've been given. If you want to do that, you can contact me. My email and website are in the description. I also do want to ask, if you're still here, if you're still listening, I do want to ask you to write a review and follow me in all the places, so that we can grow this thing and grow this conversation, and make something big together. But until next time, just remember that while these cycles create context, it is our choices that shape what emerges. This is a crucible, and what we do now is what matters. The stars have set the stage, but we write the book, or whatever. we write the tweet. Let's write it consciously, collectively, purposefully. Let's track what we love and preserve what we want to preserve. Let's imagine the new beginning together so that we might cause it to come into being as a collective. So until next time, be well, be conscious, and be kind. I'll see you soon.